everyone, it's Angela. The title of my experiment is Growing Yeast, Sugar Fermentation. So the purpose of this experiment is to see how the variable of sugar will affect fermentation of the yeast. I chose this experiment because I love to bake, and I bake a lot, but anytime I try something with yeast as the ingredient, it doesn't ever come out the way that it's supposed to. So I also chose this experiment because I figured once I did the experiment, hopefully succeeding, it would be something fun to do with my daughter. So the problem that I'm trying to answer is what sugar's effect is on yeast. The yeast strains are tiny microscopic organisms, meaning that they contain cells with a nuclei. So being classified as a fungi, the same kingdom as a mushroom, yeast is more closely related to people than plants. In this experiment, we will watch yeast come to life as it breaks down the sugar, also known as sucrose, through a process called fermentation. Because yeast is like us, it needs a supply of energy for its growth and living. Yeast must get their food in their surrounding environments so that they can continue to grow and reproduce. That is, just to simply make more yeast. So yeast feeds on the sugars and the starches, which are abundant just like in bread dough. They turn this food into energy and release carbon dioxide gas as a result. This process is known as fermentation. The carbon dioxide gas made during fermentation is actually what makes the slice of bread so soft and squishy. The pockets of gas that are produced by the yeast when the dough is allowed to rise before baking it. And the sugar supplies the energy, just like our body needs to get as much of its energy from sugars and other carbohydrates. So the yeast can use the oxygen to release energy from the sugar, just like a person can. In this process, we call respiration. So the more sugar that there is, the more active the yeast will be, and the faster that it will grow. But that's only up to a certain point, because even yeast can't grow in a very strong sugar like honey. So my hypothesis is that the yeast will ferment when you add the sugar. I've come to this hypothesis because with all the research that I've done online, that I have been able to find, and everything that I have read, it's been explained that humans, which is like yeast, are living microbes, and they contain cells. And the yeast needs the energy to grow. So the sugar is actually what provides the yeast with that energy. So the materials that are needed for this experiment are 3 clear glass cups, 2 teaspoons of sugar, some water, both warm and cold, active dry yeast, measuring spoon, specifically a teaspoon, measuring cup, which is a 1/4 cup, 3 small dishes, and a permanent marker. So what I've gone ahead and done is I have filled all 3 dishes with about 2 inches of cold water. And you can see that we have number 1, number 2, and number 3. So the next thing that we're going to do in glass 1, I don't know if you guys can see that. Let me see. So we've got glass 1 over here, and I am going to put 1 teaspoon of yeast, a 1/4 cup of warm water, and 2 teaspoons of sugar. And then in glass 2, which is the middle glass, it's labeled number 2, we are going to put 1 teaspoon of yeast with a 1/4 cup of warm water, and then in cup 3 we're just going to put the yeast. So let me go ahead and do that because it takes a few minutes for everything to activate with each other. So I'm going to go ahead and put the yeast in number 1 along with the 2 teaspoons of sugar. Here's 1. And here's 2. The second one, I'm just going to put the teaspoon of yeast, and we will add the warm water, 1/4 cup of warm water, to the first cup and the second cup. So now we just need to give it a minute to allow the sugar and the yeast to break down. And we are going to observe each of the reactions. So far you can see in cup number 3, it's just the yeast. So there's no water to cause any sort of a reaction. And in cup 2, we have just the yeast and the water. So you can see that it's not really breaking down very much. And then we've got cup 3 where it's dissolving a little bit, but it's got to have some time